morning. We welcome all participants of this workshop, both in person and online. Thank you for your contribution in writing the chapters and also presenting them here. We would like to thank the Institute for Advanced Studies in Paris for its institutional, logistical, and financial support. Also, I would like to thank Valérie and Acetu from LATTS at the University of Gustave Eiffel. And finally, we are grateful for the financial support of Université Gustave Eiffel and the Agence Nationale de la Recherche, ANR. Ludovic apologized for being unable to join us today due to a sad family event, but he told us that he's very much looking forward to join us tomorrow morning. And here with me, it's Ivana Socoloff from the University of Buenos Aires. I'm Lucia Shimbo, I forgot to present myself, from the University of São Paulo, and a fellow here at the Instituto des Études Avancées de Paris, and Félix Addison from the University Gustave Eiffel. The first session, we would like to make with you a general discussion on the book's underlying research ambition, namely the hypothesis of planetary financialisation. And we will briefly present the concept paper, and I have a collective discussion on it. At the end, we'll keep a few minutes to explain how the workshop is organized. But before we move to the concept paper, we are going to explain the goals of the workshop. So our session is divided into three main parts: the goals of the workshop, the presentation, and then the discussion of the concept paper, and then the workshop organization. After our first workshop in Rio de Janeiro last May, we are now moving forward with the development of the book, The Financialisation and Space. And the main goals of this second workshop are: the first one, to gather feedback that will help authors improve their draft papers, complementing also the editor's suggestions; to discuss the planetary financialisation framework, its relevance, limitations, and how it can be applied, if needed, in the book; and also to try to chart the road ahead towards the finalization of the chapters. So I'm going to start the second part of this session. And I'd like now to begin to discuss the concept paper, which we sent to you in December, and we apologize for its length, with 40 pages. The working paper is titled Towards a Theory of Planetary Financialisation. Is co-authored by Félix Addison, as I said, from Laboratoire, Techniques, Territoires et Sociétés, from the University Gustave Eiffel, Ludovic Halbert, CNRS researcher and also researcher at LATTS, myself, Lucia Shimbo, and Ivana Socoloff from the Universidad de Buenos Aires. While this concept paper is dedicated to support a research project funded by ANR and FAPESP that focuses on financial markets and ecologies, we thought it could serve to our collective book to some extent, at least. And we want to discuss with you this, see if it's appropriate or not. After developing research on the financialization of urban production for more than 15 years, it came to our attention that it's not only a process that expands sectorally into different economic sectors, but also it spans all kinds of landscapes and ecosystems. So this is the main problem, but there are also some key limitations on these on this problem. The first one that we've noticed is that some works on financialization, they are some macro or sectorally inspired studies on financialization that pay a little attention to the production of space. Other geographical works that question the production of space can overlook the contemporary political economy of financialized capitalism. And those that do connect financialization and space production remain fragmented, for example, separating urban and no-urban spaces, even though financial globalization and planetary metabolic relations calls for a more interconnected framework. And as for the research that critically studies financialization and the environmental question, the risk is to fall into a niche perspective influenced by financial markets' own categories, such as green finance, blue finance, sustainable finance, etc. In the paper, we introduce the concept of planetary financialization, which, offers a broad theoretical framework to explain how financial market actors, capital, and instruments reshape landscapes across the globe, examines planetary processes that constitute Earth's materializations, from agricultural fields to skyscrapers and underground mines. And the structure of the paper aims to trace the theoretical foundations of planetary financialization in its first section, define its key mechanisms, and provide an empirical example. We took the example of the Minas Gerais state in Brazil, and outline directions for further research. Today, we will focus on the first 2 points, the theoretical foundations and the key mechanisms, because they are more directly relevant to the book's perspective. However, we hope to discuss the 2 other aspects in light of your chapters. So, the concept of planetary financialization builds on and tries to contribute to 3 major bodies of literature that we called the Neo-Lefebvrean planetary urbanization, geographical studies of financialization, and Marxist political ecology. The first one, there was a vast amount of literature that followed Neubrenner and Christian Schmidt's thesis on planetary urbanization, which introduced an epistemological rethinking around an urban theory without and outside. Planetary urbanization draws 2 key insights from Henri Lefebvre's perspective. First, rejecting the city versus rural divide, and second, emphasizing how space is linked to capitalism and class relations, particularly in how the production of space through materiality, representations, and everyday life connects with capitalist restructuring and class dynamics. Critics argue that it presented a city-centric view in an economicist conception, while overlooking ecological and social issues. The upcoming book by Neubrenner and others, titled Environments of Planetary Financialization, confirms this later missing perspective. For us, there is another gap in this debate. It doesn't specifically address a key aspect of contemporary political economy, namely financialized capitalism. The second group of literature, in what we tried to suggest a name as geographical studies of financialization, we identify convergent trends across diverse geographical studies, rural, infrastructural, and environmental. However, we also observed a limited dialogue when it exists between these fields, particularly between urban and no-urban studies, as we tried here in this table to organize these 2 main approaches concerning each theme treated by this literature. This fragmentation has hindered the development of a comprehensive understanding and conceptualization of the expanding role of capital markets in financing various economic sectors and shaping landscapes and ecosystems. Additionally, in spite of works either on natural resources or on the recent green turn in market finance, the environmental dimension has not been considered systematically. For example, there is too much to be researched on the role of environmental issues and risks in financial investments, as well as their ecological effects. And the third one, critical political ecology, including Marxist-inspired works, has deeply analyzed environmental issues. Using the concept of metabolism, it makes two key contributions in our view. First, it highlights the dialect between society and nature, emphasizing how all landscapes are shaped by the logic of capitalism. On this first aspect, this approach reveals that the production of spaces is also the production of nature, as said by Neil Smith. Second, it shows how capitalist relations have profoundly transformed planetary metabolisms in the reproduction of life, both human and non-human, driving today's climate and social environmental crisis. Although, at a general level, thinkers like Jason Moore claims that Wall Street is a way of organizing nature, there is still a need to properly examine the role and effects of financial markets on socio-ecological relationships. And here there are some covers of the books and the book of Neil Brenner's Environments of Planetary Urbanization. So the contributions of planetary financialization, we could say that it can serve as an endpoint and to the literature related to planetary from planetary urbanization, we retain the reframing of planetary as more than just a global scale, emphasizing a relational conception that insists on the flows and the functional interactions across differentiated yet interconnected landscapes. Following a new Lefebvrean tradition, this approach challenges long-standing geographical divisions, particularly the traditional separation between cities, rural areas, and so-called natural spaces. It also allows for more systematic comparisons between and across geographies. So this planetary financialization, it could serve as an endpoint regarding this discussion concerned to planetary urbanization. And to the geographical studies of financialization, on its side, remind us that we are not dealing with just any form of capitalism, but specifically financialized capitalism. Recent works have placed the emphasis on the centrality of the asset management industry and its impact on different socio-ecological formations. So we retain this aspect from this literature. And finally, Marxist political ecology contributes by offering an unitary body that integrates Earth's socio-ecological elements into a single analytical framework. But planetary financialization can serve also as a starting point. The analytical framework proposed by this concept opens new venues for planetary urbanization in Marxist political ecology by focusing on how financialized capitalism shapes space and how the asset management industry impacts different types of socio-ecological formations. Planetary financialization also enables systematic comparisons across urban, rural, infrastructure, environmental, and other geographical sub-studies of financialization. It embodies a unifying gesture that takes stock of the planetary socio-ecological continuum and its interdependencies. And here, the second part of the paper, we try to systematize our understanding of planetary financialization and make it a more directly operational concept. And then we identified 4 distinctive necessary features that should enable scholars and also activists to map its instance across the globe. None of these elements are new on their own. They have already been defined and debated in the literature, and instead of continuing these debates, we aim to organize them into a systematic framework which we call the analytic of planetary financialization. The first concept is that of financial infrastructures, which are large socio-technical systems that collect, transfer, and distribute capital across sectors, agents, and space. Not all financial infrastructures are linked to financial markets. So when actors from such markets are involved, we then talk about financialized financial infrastructures. In this case, financial markets trade property rights attached to financial instruments related to the provision of debt or equity, and manage capital over accumulation by creating and directing funds to different sectors and locations, as this diagram made by Stephen Uma shows. I don't know if you can read, but I think everybody knows these flows of money and all the actors and intermediaries that are involved in the asset management in the, industry. And here we can change, the object of investment is farmland, but we could put there housing, infrastructure, etc. Planetary financialization looks at these financial infrastructures from a dialectical perspective. First, on one side, the centralization of financial capital leads to the growth and concentration of investments, driving processes like abstraction, standardization, and hyper-extractivism, while also causing instability in this system. On the other side, these financial actors direct capital into various regions, bringing distant investors into the local picture through property claims. And here we put the map of the case of Minas Gerais with the connections between the locations of shareholders of the companies which invest in Minas Gerais, and also the locations of all the stock exchanges linked to the case that we discussed in the paper. The second feature is assetization, which is defined as turning things into assets. Capitalization techniques and rent extraction are based on legal actions that lead to the appropriation of rights and enclosure. This is not just a technical process, it involves a set of narratives about imagined futures, as Beckett poses, as well as material accounting and calculative practices. Beyond the technical dimension, assetization is also a political economic structure because control over assets is a source of social power. So planetary financialization adopts a critical view of assetization, and it focuses on the class relations and the struggles that form the politics of assetization, and the issues of power, time, and space that shift the focus from the moment when something becomes an asset to a longer process that covers its entire social life. And here we showed a typical discounted flow calculation that is the representative financialized valuation technique. And the third feature is the socio-ecological fix, which builds on Harvey's spatial fix. And I'm not going to explain to you the definition of Harvey, but a socio-ecological fix recognizes the importance of metabolic processes involving the production of space and the transformation of social natures, as Michael Eckers and Prudhomme, and Michael Eckers is also in our book. And it looks at how social relations and material and symbolic conditions of capitalist accumulations are reproduced through investments in landscapes that are both spaces and nature. And for us, that's the importance of this definition on socio-ecological fix, because it incorporates nature and space. So with sociological fix, planetary financialization can go beyond an economicist perspective and address issues of legitimacy and the hegemony, as these fixes help restore the power of governments and corporations in managing environmental crises. And it also provides a broader understanding that goes beyond the overaccumulation of capital as a driving force, as is reinforced by the notion of spatial fix, and to see sociological fix as solutions to environmental crises, or what O'Connor describes as the underproduction of nature, or the limits that the nature imposes to these solutions. And the fourth feature is the twin concepts: exploitation of labor, expropriation of social natures. Following Marx, these are two foundational and dialectical elements of capitalism. With political ecology, planetary financialization moves beyond an overly anthropocentric view. This shift encourages us to analyze not only how capitalist production deprives humans of essential resources like land, water, knowledge, or plants that are appropriated by financial investors. And it also highlights how no human beings are expropriated as financialization unfolds, and how ecosystems are profoundly altered by this process. And here we showed a map with the environmental justice conflicts in the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil that we presented in the concept paper. So now we are able to define planetary financialization as a global process in which capital operates through financialized financial infrastructures that enable the assetization of elements of the built or unbuilt environment, establishing socio-ecological fixes rooted in the exploitation of labor and the expropriation of social natures. And here we presented 4 pictures related to the three economic sectors: mining, infrastructure, farmlands, and housing, real estate and housing. So 4, sorry. So I would like to pass to Ivana to start our discussion part, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Lucia. Well, now it's time for a discussion. Good morning, everyone. As you know, this is the second workshop of our collective handbook. And as Lucia mentioned, one of the scientific objectives of these 2 workshops is to test the concept, including its limits. So I will moderate this part of the discussion, whose objectives are to discuss planetary financialization and its analytics. So as I was saying, I will moderate this part of the discussion, whose objectives are to discuss planetary financialization and its analytics, and to reflect specifically on its contribution to our research book. So firstly, I would like to pass the mic to those online and those here in the audience. And so we like to reflect on the interest, if any, of the concept, but also more critical in its frivolities, redundancies, useless developments, missing dimensions, nonsense, and of course, as I said, its limits. So we have 20 minutes for you to react to, and we'll as we develop this paper, I think your comments will be very useful in what's coming. A part of this will go into the introduction, but this is not exactly the introduction of the book. It was thought as a specific paper related to the project of the handbook. So,
do you want to start?
Yeah, about the concept, and what would be your main, unit of analysis, to say, in the sense that in the paper you analyze the case of Minas Gerais, which is okay, but in general, are you planning on analyzing cities and more socio-nature spaces, or are you planning to use it in a more comprehensive or also on a smaller scale? That's something that perhaps wasn't clear, in the sense that, of course, you're only giving one example. So I would also like to understand what other scales you can apply this concept in. Is it clear?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. First, to say that for Enike and me, it was an inspiring frame. When we read it, we thought, oh, should we reorganize our chapters around the 4 dimensions? Then we thought, maybe it's too late. Let's keep it as it is. But just to maybe give some feedback on the things that I didn't understand or were not so clear to me. Also, this definition that you just presented, it's also in page 12 in the paper. It is, as it is formulated now, it seems very unidirectional, like financialized financial infrastructures, they enable the assetization, which establishes socio-ecological fixes. So it goes like in one direction. And also, I remember from Rio, the discussion with Gisele, for example, with the flickering of these things going back and forth. Maybe it's not in unidirectional, maybe it also goes the other way around. You first have the fixes, then you have assetization, and maybe you have financialized financial infrastructures, or not completely, they go back and forth, so maybe this thing. And then I find the analytic very good for comparison, but I'm also wondering how is it good to link different spaces? So also in Rio, we discussed what's going on with a forest that is not financialized, maybe it's public even, or it is native tribes are still there, but around it, there is already something financialized. And how do these link together? How do they influence each other? How does this analytic help us to make the connection between different spaces, different maybe neighboring geographies or far away from each other? And connected to this, just to say that to me, the value of planetary urbanization was that it included spaces that didn't seem to be urban and were not part of the usual discussion of what is urban. So then I'm also wondering, how does this help to include and analyze what doesn't seem financialized? Thank you so much.
Okay. We can take a few more questions or reactions or comments.
Thank you very much for putting this concept paper. I thought it was very well put together. But as an anthropologist, I was wondering about how it lacks of a piece of imagination. Because when we are talking about financialization, we normally are talking about something that is highly imagined and very highly far from the ground. So part of our problem, I think, when we put financialization as something and we think about in a global scale and all the flows that goes, so the flows would be important, but also the imagination that lacks the territorial connection and how we need to connect the territorial aspects, what's going on the ground with what's going on in the imagination of this creation of the assets. Because everything around financial markets is about an idea of value. And if we are using Marxist theory, we need to think about what people think about things, not actually, and what it relates in the ground. That starts in a room like this, far from a forest or far from where is the mining places. And I think that what I was missing when I was reading the concept and how to put that imagination of this market, the imagination of that flows, the imagination of the assetization and how it corresponds on a very disconnect at the first sight dynamics on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, one more and then we can do another turn later.
Yeah. was just wondering also, because with financialization and capital markets, we often have this idea of those, mega financial groups, etc., and kind of very formal types of financial relations. And how does if it's not, it sounded strong enough. How does the informal financial markets work, especially micro-level market? How do you integrate it into planetary financialization? Because very often there's this sense that a little bit like those major formal institutions are going to be able to disengage from the often very exploitative private lending and patronage patterns. And so I'm just wondering a little bit, like, the lived experiences of, being in a more and more complex financial system whereby, traditional relations with, like people on the city council or, the shop owners that would be lending money in the past are now being replaced by those online platforms, and that have drastically reduced price of credit, exposing them to more debt possibly, but also to less, exploitative schemes of financialization of everyday life. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. Now we do a turn of reactions.
I think that usually we work on smaller scales in our case studies, but this time with Minas Gerais, the idea was that this scale was a good opportunity to draw the linkage, the relationships between the sectors, the interdependencies between, for instance, real estate, mining, and agribusiness. So I think that, in a sense, planetary financialization is open to various scales of analysis, from the more micro to the more macro. But I think that in the paper the example of Minas Gerais was interesting for this reason. And this relates to the question about not the comparison, but the link between spaces. If I understood well, this is an idea of planetary financialization. So it's not only theoretical framework that allows comparison between sectors, between different regions, but also a way to connect spaces to one another. And about the unidirectional causal relationships, I think that it's not our idea, absolutely not. I mean, the four dimensions are possibly working in all directions. But if you did this comment, it's because it's unclear in the paper, so it's something that we must improve. But I'm sure that we agree on this idea. And you're absolutely right when you say that, for instance, there is a social ecological fix, a jam, for instance, and it will be bought by money from financial markets, and then maybe there will be a transformation, material transformation, or in the management, or so. Yeah, clearly there is a relationship in all directions. And yes, a question about local markets and the relationship between these actors from financial markets that ask for more formality and how they relate to existing settings and existing more or less institutionalized way to do business or and so on. I think that's a good question, which is not addressed in the paper, except I think in the exploitation, expropriation dimension. So maybe it's a way to reflect more on these aspects in the conceptualization. But it's a great question. In another paper about logistics, the financialization of warehouses and logistics in Brazil that we worked with Ludovic, Daniel Sanfelici, and Mayra Magnani. We show how asset management firms worked with local actors to create financialized growth coalitions locally, and how they have been able to take the control of this of these coalitions. But yes, clearly they used the existing relationships of the developers of warehouses and their political connections in order to expand the investments in warehouses in these localities. Yeah.
Thank you very much. First of all, on the unit of analysis, I think it's an important question. We reflected a lot about this. One of the ideas and the way we sort of illustrate the concept through the case of Minas Gerais was to start by a concrete process of space production in a specific landscape in a specific region in Brazil, and start from there to analyze the process by which this space is being transformed these days. So the idea with planetary financialization is, or it helps illustrate how specific space is being altered not by just one sector, as Felix said, but also in relation to different types of spaces, different sector of production, etc. I think from all of us that come from the studies of financialization, from a geographical, sociological, anthropological perspective, etc., we're very much used to focus on a specific sector. And in the case of Minas Gerais, what we try to show is that the same space is being traversed by many different processes of financialization. So I would say that this relationship between the concrete space, the concrete landscape, and the way these analytics help to illustrate many avenues by which this space is being transformed these days. I don't know if that helps with or if that completely answers your question. About the unidirectionality of the concept, you are absolutely right, Ivana. It wasn't the idea of the paper to show a unidirection, all the opposite. So I think probably in the way it's written, we should probably change some of the wording so that the idea of something more dynamic is taking part. As I said, you ask about the non-urban and how do we illuminate sort of the spaces who don't seem financialized, and they are in fact are. I think again the example that we tried to use was an area of Brazil that is not part of the main cities or the main regions. It's a very important state in Brazil, but it's outside the optics of many of the studies of financialization, or it probably at first eye wouldn't seem as a very financialized space and landscape, concrete landscape. So in a way, the idea again was to use this space to connect the urban and non-urban areas. So once you look at the space, you find that it's traversed by, as we said, different processes, different companies, different fluxes that are being fixed in either the city or the rural, etc. So for us, it sort of helps connect sectors and spaces across multiple scales. About the symbolic dimension, I think the symbolic dimension for us is very important and has always been very important aspect of the concept. More clearly, I would say that in the analytics, when we talk about assetization, the symbolic dimension and the imaginary dimension is extremely important, but also in the process of socio-ecological fixing of this process are dynamic, conflictual, and bring about this symbolic dimension of the process. It's not only about fixing capital unidirectionally, but all the opposite. It's a conflict that is never achieved, that is never complete, etc. About the formal informal, this is something we have discussed a lot in our network, because many of the people that are part come from the global south, and we know that the financial sector doesn't work in the same way, in a way. So for us, the informal aspects are very important, but one of the key issues as we define financialization is how these informal are connected to the global and the national and other scales of intervention. So in that sense, you mentioned the payment platforms and the informal circuits of money, etc. But for us, it's very important that what's behind that are very formal institutions, are very global international actors so appropriating these companies and these resources and extracting value in the concrete territory. So let's say the traditional institutions are penetrating all of these informal practices in many different ways. So this connection is important for us to understand the idea of planetary financialization.
I would like just to complement and also thank you for your questions. First, I think when we consider the Minas Gerais, the entry point was by defining, mapping, no, defining a territorial limit. So we've chosen Minas Gerais as a region, and then we tried to map all the multi-sector companies that were linked to financial markets that were investing in this specific territory or region. But we could have other types of entry points or criteria. For instance, we could take economic sectors. We could take an investment fund. But then this is our discussion now, how to establish these analyses and the entry points to research the planetary financialization. The example, we made this exercise in the concept paper by the entrance defining the geographical region, but we could take, for instance, we could take a conception like environmental justice, and then try to map all the financialized financial infrastructure that can be related to these environmental conflicts in some place. So answering the Leonardo's question, we are open to define if it's a region, a city, if it's an economic sector, but we think that this framework enables these different entry points to analyze empirical problems. Ivana asked us the other directions, the ground to of financialization, and also the comparison with non-financialized space. And it was interesting because last week I presented the concept paper here at the Instituto des Études Avancées, and the majority of the researchers, they are not used to the conception of financialization. So I had to explain what financialization was, and some of them, they said, oh, after your explanation, now I'm able to understand 70% of financialization. I said, okay, 70. And then one question that they said that it was exactly this question. What's the novelty that financialized financial infrastructures, what do they bring to industrial process or previous process or traditional, what would say the other types of production that financing production without passing by capital markets. And they said, oh, it could be a good option to compare non-financialized sectors or landscapes with the introduction or with the arrival of these actors in this space. So it's really a good question. And how, if there is a novelty or not. And this question on, I think Felix and Ivana already answered. We thought that this dimension of the lived experience, the ground, we could treat them in the notion of exploitation and expropriation, and also in the assetization dimension. But I'm aware that these maybe this Marxist approach is not enough, so we could we are open to. But it's a good question. And just to complement the informal markets, I think that we are focused on trying to map these advancement of the frontiers of financialized process into these considered also called informal markets, and Ivana already answered. Okay.
So thank you very much for the paper. I think it's really relevant and very rich and will be very useful. My question is about just a small aspect. You mentioned in the paper the concept of class relations, and you include it in the framework, but it wasn't really clear to me how it works in the framework, how it works exactly in the framework. So can you elaborate a little bit more about what financialization does to class relations according to the framework, and how much is it linked to labor exploitation? What social class are at stakes exactly here? Yeah, that's something very specific, but useful for me, because I would like to link labor geography with all this discussion about financialization.
So great to see this collective paper stemming out from our long-run collaboration that we've been developing over the past year. I already sent my comments by email a couple of days ago, so I'm not going to run through every email, but I wanted to follow up on what Nicola just said. I think there's a lot of emphasis, a discursive emphasis perhaps, on class-based cleavages. But so you underscore a lot class-based cleavages and modes of exploitation, but recent works on ecological Marxism, and for instance, I'm thinking about Pierre Gilbert's book at Amsterdam in 2023, emphasized instead a multiplicity of dimensions and inequality in terms of dominations, so gender, race. So of course you cannot, like I said in my email, you cannot address every point. You already do a lot in your paper, but I'm curious to know what do you make of it. And a second comment, following up on Ivana's reply about the Minas Gerais case. So this place is located somewhere, right? It's in, pardon me saying, but in the global south, to go very quickly. But this has, as you very well know, has implications if we take seriously, for example, the international financial subordination literature. So this has an impact over how financialization unfolds, over power relationships, and so on and so forth. So I was wondering to what extent does this play a role in your framework? I'm curious to know your thoughts about this. I was already discussing with Felix this point going here, but perhaps you can tell me what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Igor Carvalho. I'm PhD candidate at the University of Geneva, now in mobility at LATTS in Paris. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I have two comments on the definition of planetary financialization. The first would be if it could think broader in the definition of capital, like the agent capital. Planetary financialization as a global process in which capital operates. And I was thinking, if we take, for instance, the case of China or Angola, the cases that I'm studying now, for instance, in China, financialization happens pretty much based on the state intervenience. If you take, for instance, the local government's financial vehicles that operates with land rents and financialization credits, financializing credits through the basis of land rents, which are owned by local governments. And so the whole operation is orchestrated by the state. And I think that capital here limits a bit this agent. Also, capital, to my point of view, sometimes we think of a very big structure of unknown players. But if you take, for instance, the case of Angola, where real estate financial trusts are just starting to be thinking and to be organized, you see pretty much that are local people, local businessmen trying to make these structures to shape. So yeah, so perhaps there's a nuance also behind this idea of capital that could be highlighted. And the second point would be when we're talking about exploitation of labor, I think there's idea of value behind. And I was wondering whether we could just put value, the word value also in this definition, because I think it's pretty central and it builds on what your comments were, what you were commenting before. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rafaela Lima from the University of Sheffield. Yeah, thank you for super interesting, I think, and productive chapter. I think you touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask, so I think one of the big critiques of planetary urbanization is that it kind of takes urbanization for granted, or kind of implies that, you know, the entire planet is inevitably heading towards full urbanization, which you can argue whether that's a fair or unfair critique. But do you see the concept of planetary financialization being subject to a similar critique, and how would you respond?
Thank you. Well, yeah, Gisele.
And I see that a lot of the elements are looking at the how in terms of the mechanics, what it's needed, etc. So I'm curious if you expect the framework to also think about what landscapes are being reshaped into. So are we talking about increased depletion of resources, concentration of land ownership? So in terms more of the outcomes of this process, or is it a framework that's supposed to describe how the process is unfolding rather than, you know, the actual reshaping of the landscapes?
Thank you, Gisele. Maybe we can start. Well, these are very, very difficult questions, and I'll start with some ideas, but again, it's something we are still working on reflecting on. First of all, on the class relations, I think we took the term from a very Marxist perspective throughout the paper, and with that that saying, that doesn't mean that ignoring other forms of contradiction and conflict within capitalist society. And I think no, we try to include all of these dimensions in the paper, and we mention in the exploitation, expropriation part, and also in the socio-ecological fixing part of this process, how these different conflicts unfold within financialization. and we don't want to imply there is one way and one specific way by which all of the rest are determined. So in that sense, I would say that the use is very general, and we didn't specifically try to bring something new to the use of the concept of class relation. But speaking about the effects within the framework of planetary financialization, the idea was to highlight basically processes of exploitation and expropriation going on within the fixing of capital and the transformation of spaces. So I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, or I don't fully answer your question, but the dimension of it was important for us to include within the concept this idea that inequality and different forms of inequality are a very important part of the process of extracting value in the territory and transforming the territory. And this goes on also for the international relationships and the way specific territories are being exploited by international or global north organizations. So the asymmetries of power were sort of brought up through these concepts. But I don't think we had any way of specific reflecting on how we use the concept. We sort of took the class relations for granted, in the sense that we use a very common framework, and we're very much inspired from Marxist political ecology and other Marxist authors. So we took the concept from there. About the way that capital operates versus state, I don't think in our framework we try to make a difference implying that capital is in a way private versus public money. That I can say, we took the concept of capital again from a Marxist point of view, in the sense that the link with the state and the way the state operates is very important in the de-risking of private money, or in the formation of the financialized financial infrastructure through regulation, through funds, through so the idea is definitely not to make a stark separation between state and capital at all. So maybe we again might need a nuance conceptualization or wording, but definitely this is an important part of our framework, not to separate state from capital as private from public. Rafaela, and your question about is everything being financialized and is financialization a trend? We very much discussed this as well. And we are aware of the critique of planetary urbanization, implying that everything is going urban. This was definitely not the idea of the concept of planetary financialization, but to grasp specific processes going on, and of course the limits and the contradictions of what financialization, of the ways in which financialization is transforming space, naming that it's not a complete process, it's not an achieved process, it's an ongoing process that is also not transforming everywhere every time. It's uneven development of this planetary financialization. So and this is again a very key point to show the difference in which these can be observed versus where there are no financialized financial infrastructures, there are no assetization process going on, and this analytics is or should serve to be able to observe and operationalize the concept in the specific cases. these are futures that sort of should exist in order to talk about planetary financialization. And Gisele's question, I think our framework also is trying to consider the outcomes. We, of course, in our research, we're very much based on everyone else's research on the topics of financialization and the production of space. So definitely the outcomes, the idea was not to name specific outcomes because this is very variegated over space, but to illustrate the way in which this operates, and the way it operates can imply that same operations have different and variegated effects across space. So overall, we can say that planetary financialization is definitely intensifying, accelerating the process of the destruction of nature, the transformation of space, etc. And of course, the volume of capital and the way this capital is connected to the global market also has an effect in the way spaces are being transformed. But the idea was not to identify specific outcomes going on in specific places, but to just give a framework that would serve to illuminate specific researches taken by by people interested in thinking about this. I don't know. Okay. Sorry, I monopolized the word. We have a few more minutes, and so the second part of this specific section of this morning was to we would like to invite you to discuss more specifically the contribution of this concept to our collective book. There are at least two perspectives on this. First, does the concept resonate with your chapter? Is it useful to you, to your analysis, either as a background proposal or as a more hands-on analytical tool for demonstration? Second, should and even can it contribute to the general organization of the book? In particular, can the four components of the analytic be a way to articulate, on the one hand, the specific argument developing in your specific chapter, and on the other hand, with the larger contribution of planetary financialization? In other words, does it make sense to you to organize the book in these four analytics?
Thank you. So just to say that from reading some of the draft chapters already in the folder, I can see that there are many chapters that talk about preconditions for these four dimensions. So many have a historical, I read a few, but they have a historical approach and they present how it came to be. So maybe this is interesting. I find it interesting, and it is a connection, so it can be useful as this. Maybe also included in the chapter that there is also a history. You also have it in the empirical part, but maybe highlight it because chapters reflect on that. And then for our chapters and from the financialization literature in Central and Eastern Europe, there is a lot of discussion about these financialized financial infrastructures because they don't look the same and they don't seem to be financialized. And it's exactly this, it's a subordinate financialization form, and then it looks different. And then, and can you say that they don't exist, they are not financialized? Some people would say they are not financialized, but we would say they are, and they are part of planetary, they are instances of planetary financialization, but the four dimensions don't look as you would expect. So we used it to guide the chapter, but we also kind of insisted that it doesn't look the same, and it is maybe not financialized from some perspective.
All the chapters will have to advise you on this, but a classic structure would be probably a first part would be more the frameworks themselves and looking at those chapters that look at each of these four individual aspects, or the linkages, etc. And the second part would be much more about case study driven, very rich type of applications of the frameworks, where, you know, especially you as editors could even push a little bit further the authors to, you know, identify, you know, or dimensions, which one would be. And the last point is financialization, discussion of concepts, etc., has been there for quite a while. So I think a quite critical perspective would also be expected. You know, in terms of, you know, because you seem to be pushing the concept even further with this term, like we have the planetary extraction or the planetary mind, those kinds of things. And so there'll probably be a little bit of a way for a critic, you know, within the book. So it'd be nice for a chapter that also looks at those bases, financialize or not, and what comes after. Or,
Thank you, Antoine.
So I don't want to ruin the mood, but I think this may be different projects, you know, because I mean, we're already, I mean, I can see that some entries really fit within the framework. Some others don't. Some of them may address free analytics or so for me, it will be hard. So contribute to the general organization of the book. You could think, oh, okay, one analytic is one part, so you have 4 parts, but I don't think this is going to work because some papers, like I said, fit into 1 part, others into 3 parts, others perhaps into none of them. So this is tricky, and because of the timing, I think this is a fantastic idea, and this is another book. This is an edited book that starts. That starts with the framework as you're building it, and that would take people together and trying to apply the framework to their different research. But and why not make, for example, just an entry on planetary financialization? This, I mean, this is in the handbook. So I'm just thinking on top of my head, but it seems to be hard to use it as an organization, really like an architecture of the book. But then perhaps it can just be the general introduction. Another scenario will be just to make this the general introduction and to cherry pick across the chapters some that really illustrate one point, one of the 4 analytics. But then the risk is that this is very siloed. I don't know. I think there are different options. The most minimal will be make just an entry on planetary financialization, and this is the handbook on finance and space. And you do, perhaps if you have time one day, do another on an edited volume on planetary financialization or a special issue. Perhaps there is a middle ground in having this as an introduction and cherry picking among the chapters, and perhaps the strong option will be use the paper and its structure as a structure of the book, but I think there is little ground for that, really, I'm afraid.
So just to remember, I'm not an editor of the book. I'm just an author of the concept paper. I was positively surprising when I saw the program of these 3 days, how much the different chapters fit into the different analytics, the different so maybe contrary to Antoine, I think that it could be a way to organize the chapters, and maybe this is a good idea also to have chapters that are more empirically based to be put in a second part. I think it's a great suggestion. In my understanding, the difference between what you announced at the beginning of the project of the handbook and what you presented in Rio and the concept paper is an emphasis on political ecology, Marxist political ecology. And I suppose that most of the chapters are not addressing not only this literature but environmental concerns. So maybe this is the most difficult thing to articulate and to change in the chapter in order to articulate perfectly the state of the art of your reflection and what has been wrote until now, written. So yeah, maybe this part that is too difficult to update in the chapters.
Yeah. Sorry, maybe about the structure and the organization. Maybe I missed something there, but I remember, and actually, what I did when I started drafting the chapter was following the call for papers that, it proposed like 5 main areas or topics. And I understand that you evolved from there, and perhaps you have like a different approach now, and you have developed your own theory, and that's of course a different thing. But what about getting closer to that original structure or that original proposed target topics and trying to follow a little bit that, that guideline or model? I don't know, maybe I missed there something again.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think we can only say for now that the structure and the organization of the chapters we are still reflecting on. The idea of presenting the concept was not at all to impose a framework and or to sort of base the book only on planetary financialization. The idea, and as you know, we developed this concept in the past year or so. So the idea was not to, again, to use the concept to create an entire volume on planetary financialization, but basically use the concept as a way to include the ideas and the different studies within the financialization group of studies coming from a geographical perspective and from the production of space overall. So the idea was to bring these works within the framework of planetary financialization, and organize it in a way that would bring some specific instances that are highlighted in all of the chapters. But again, this is a reflection that is going on. We will discuss this also with Ludovic and decide what's the better way to organize the book. We had thought originally of theory versus cases traditional way of structuring the chapters, but now I guess we are more convinced that probably the different analytics make sense in a way to highlight the different chapters. But again, the chapters bring more things that are not in the paper that we wrote. The idea of organizing it as well as conditions of possibility of planetary financialization versus planetary financialization is another way of thinking about it. So again, this is a reflection that's going on, and we'll continue with our conversations. So finally, a few words about the workshop organization. We have 10 hybrid sessions in total. So first, this opening session followed by 7 theme sessions. The theme sessions correspond to an attempt to bring together the chapters along one of the 4 dimensions of planetary financialization analytics. Again, this was an attempt. There will be also a Q&A session tomorrow with editors for those interested in sharing concern, doubt, difficulties, or remarks about the specific project of writing the final version of the chapter. Finally, we'll have a closing session on Friday, a discussion of the cross-cutting insights gained during the workshops and elements to look at the final step towards the writing of the manuscript. One important aspect for us considering the diverse origins, native languages, and backgrounds of all participants, is to remain collectively aware of the asymmetries that run through the academic field. As a way to promote a safe space for discussion, we encourage scientifically rigorous and creative exchange, of course, but also friendly and respectful debate. This is, of course, very important. In practical terms, the theme sessions are organized as follows, and we already announced this in the many emails we sent. We'll have 10 minutes to present their chapters, followed by 5 minutes of Q&A and 5 minutes for authors to respond. Once all the papers have been presented and debated, a general discussion will ensue. We propose to have a cross-discussion of and a reflective conclusion of 30 minutes, consisting of 10 minutes of cross-discussion between the authors, 15 minutes of a general discussion with the audience, followed by 5 minutes for a session note-keeper, to offer a reflective consideration based on what they have heard through the session. So we have a few note-keepers that are responsible for making the final 5 minutes comments. And the moderator's role is to ensure there is timing that is respective and that the dialogue, again, remains respectful and benevolent. So with this, we close this opening session and we go to a coffee break. Well, thank you very much again, and thank you for those online.